Many of you were involved in tree planting ceremonies this spring for Earth Day and maybe are continuing that practice in your communities. These two lacebark elms I'm standing between were planted here about 4 years ago and were fairly large trees when they were transplanted and are now casting some nice shade on a hot afternoon. In fact, the lacebark got its name because the bark starts to peel away as the tree matures. It's perfectly harmless, and it's starting to show up some very attractive coloring underneath. And as the tree gets even more mature, I think we'll really enjoy seeing that along the road. Remember, the lacebark elm is resistant to Dutch elm disease. It's a very good selection for Oklahoma. However, there's another tree that we also recommend in Oklahoma, and that's the redbud. This is one that was planted that same year, about 3 or 4 years ago, but did not receive as good a care. In fact, it's even been abused somewhat. If you look down here, as the lawn growing right up to the base of it was mowed and trimmers came in after that, string type trimmers completely whipped away the bark. If you have a line type weed trimmer that you use, make sure you stay far away from trees, because even though you think you're just chipping a little bit of bark away, doing that on a regular basis through the summer will eventually remove all the bark, girdle the tree, and it will die. And this tree was not completely killed last summer. It was showing signs of stress then, and this winter finished it off completely. It has longitudinal barks all up and down the length of it. I think December's cold completely finished it off. However, it wasn't killed all the way down to the root system, because this spring some new shoots came up. So there is hope, and I think what we're going to do with this tree is cut it off right here, use the remaining trunk as a stake to hold the strongest of these new branches that have come up. In fact, right now I'll just trim away some of the smaller, weaker ones that are coming up so that all the root system's energy can go into that one shoot that's coming up, and we'll have a new redbud started there. We were lucky in this case. In some cases of municipal tree plantings, the trees die completely. Here's another example of abuse in trees that are planted in public areas. A riding lawnmower bumped this one last week and part of the bark was torn away. Now, if you see this sort of damage, try to trim this up, take the bark away, and the reason for that is that children passing by are fascinated by bark, and they might tend to want to zipper it all the way up the tree and cause even more damage. The tree doesn't know the difference if you trim this away. It's not going to help it heal any faster, but it will even up that wound. In fact, I'm going to take a little bit of paper tree wrap and put that around this, and the only reason I'm doing that is to guard that from the sun and prevent any further abuse of the tree. We don't recommend any pruning paints, as you know. Trees heal just fine on their own, but that, I think, will give it a little extra margin of safety. As we tell most gardeners, it'll make you feel better too. Now, this tree also has a little bit of weed eater damage or line trimmer damage down at the base, but it's not all the way around. We have gone in and skimmed off most of the Bermuda grass sod. We put a ditch around it, just a very shallow one, so as not to cut off the roots of the tree, but give a place for water to flow into and to be held when the trees are watered. And then over the remaining grass that's there after we did a little bit of light tilling, we've put landscape fabric. And if you remember from last week's show, landscape fabric is a spun polyester fabric that is impervious to weed growth, unless of course that it's damaged somehow and the Bermuda grass could grow up through a hole in it. Now, to help protect it, we have put some chipped up bark mulch on top that will also help hold in moisture and keep the roots of the tree a little bit cooler. Now, tree roots extend far beyond the trunk of the tree. In fact, the canopy of these trees only goes out about 3 to 5 feet. The roots go out twice as far beyond that in search of food and nutrients. But you can at least protect the trunk area by doing something like this. Now, on a very calm, still day, You could initially kill out the grass and weeds growing around the trees with a herbicide containing glyphosate. Roundup and cleanup are two common or two commercial names of that material. Don't do it on a windy day, and please don't spray it so that the spray will come in contact with the bark of very young trees. Green-barked trees that are just a year or two old can absorb that herbicide and they will sustain some damage. So if you're going to spray around very young trees, wrap the bark first to prevent any drift from getting on them. Now the landscape fabric, since we had this on the show last week, we've received a lot of calls from gardeners who want to know where to get it. And we've checked around, and most hardware outlets around Oklahoma and most garden centers as well are carrying this material. It comes in a 3-foot by 50-foot roll. We check the price. It runs anywhere from $5 to $8 depending on if it's on sale or not. I think you can get a lot of use out of it in the landscape. One thing I wanted to show you is that it's better than black plastic in that water will soak right through. If you're watering, you can see that it does soak right into the landscape fabric. The mulch will also, on top, will also prevent the water from rolling off of it if it's on a slightly mounded area such as this. Trees also need some fertilizer. Now, newly planted trees don't need any fertilizer in the planting hole because that could burn the roots. But it is a good idea, if it looks like they're not growing very vigorously, give them a little bit of fertilizer. Just scatter it from the trunk area out into the grass area. You could do this a couple of times a year with a nitrogen fertilizer. You will see the lawn area right around it green up. So the grass is getting some of the nutrients that you're putting out, but the tree will benefit some also. The ideal time to fertilize would be fall or in the late winter, early spring, but now won't hurt either if the trees need a little push. Now on watering, a good rule of thumb to remember is that in the first 1 to 3 years of a tree's life, if it doesn't get an inch of rainfall falling around it every week, then you need to put from 5 to 7 gallons of water on that tree to make sure that it'll get good root growth the first few years. Professor Cat Taylor worked out that rule of thumb for pecan trees, but I think it's an easy one to transfer over to any kind of ornamental trees that you've planted. Just remember, if you're doing tree planting around your home or in your community, that planting trees is a fun thing to do as a community effort, and it's exciting, but those trees do need some follow-up care.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.